What's going on, everybody? Non here, and it's time for the second part of the series I started doing about a week ago, the breaking of Hasbro. So before we get started, I just do want to tell you guys we do have an expected value engine for Magic the Gathering. Uh, if you're interested, it is ev.anontcg.com. It's $12.99 a month. Just for EV for all of your sealed product from Magic the Gathering. But anyway, let me get into this. If you have any questions, join the Discord, PM me at a non-admin, no big deal. So in the first part of this, we basically talked about how Hasbro has underperformed since this fine gentleman who still needs a haircut has taken over. And then within the company, you have the good part, which is effectively Wizards of the Coast, Magic the Gathering, and then everything else. And obviously, Monopoly Go makes some decent money, but the rest of the business is a melting ice cube. So we walked through the financials, basically, and got down to the summary that effectively Magic the Gathering itself is the primary asset that matters for Wizards of the Coast. So we are going to go into the second part today. And I just finished putting these slides together. I haven't read through them, so this is kind of all free flow off the top of my head. But quite honestly, I don't have that many windows of 40 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever it takes me to sit down and go through this. So this is part two, and I call this the Timmy setup. And the reason for that is everybody that I know in the industry, they don't understand what's going on. They tend to think that the tail wags the dog, and that's not the case. The dog is wagging the tail, contrary to what everybody thinks. And here's some common misconceptions, and I'm sure most of you guys know this, or hey, you've heard it. You may think they're true. That Hasbro is never ever going to reprint collector boxes. They're one and done. Hasbro has not said that for 3 years. In fact, there is zero proof that they haven't reprinted collector boxes. In fact, I would argue that they are probably reprinting them as we speak. For Spider-Man, for sure they have. Now, I'm sure they've stopped now because it's been a disaster, but for Avatar as well. And quite honestly, in my opinion, that's why they removed the serialized cards. Now, what's interesting is with Final Fantasy, Chocobos 70 through 77 have never been found, which is statistically extremely unlikely when a random distribution of all the other serialized cards have been found. So what that tells me is most likely either there's a ton of boxes sitting in pallets somewhere and those cards were seated in there, which means they were probably not super randomized. But given what we see out in the market, or what we've seen that were found, because there is a golden chocobo tracker. It's really cool. Just Google it if you want. You'll find it. My guess is they were inserted randomly in the collector boxes and then the gift bundles. And these 7 were held off for some reason, potentially wanting to reprint them later. And, I've even mentioned this multiple times. Well, the print stamp on the box says X, Y, and Z. That doesn't mean a goddamn thing. Because as we see with Pokemon, we're getting tins reprinted and sent out from 2018 or 2022, 23. The packaging doesn't necessarily matter because they can print as much as they want. And, it could be as honest as, well, I have this packaging, I paid for it, I'm going to use it, to, you know what, we're going to print the same thing so nobody in the world's going to know. And quite honestly, if we reprint and goes to Amazon, nobody's ever going to see the cases. So no harm, no foul. So there is no factual evidence to show that Hasbro has never reprinted collector boxes, and they're one and done. And I mean, look, I think most of you will point to MH3 and Kamigawa, which was just wave after wave after wave. So the second item is, I don't understand why Hasbro won't reprint Final Fantasy play boxes. There must be printing issues because, quite honestly, it's free money. And that's where my mind was for the longest time, because there weren't a whole lot of play boxes coming to market. And as we get through this, the straw that broke the camel's back, or, kind of where I had that aha moment, was when distribution solicited Spider-Man play boxes 5 weeks after the release of a disastrous set, which has no place in logic. It was planned for a very, very long time. So Item number 3, Hasbro cares about the value of my cards as a collectible. They don't give a shit about any of that. They're a for-profit company, no different than Pokemon. Now, that doesn't mean that the cards will not have value long-term or short-term or whatever. It just means that as a player, a collector, an investor, you have to understand the rules of engagement. And with the Pokemon Company, generally speaking, things rotate out after 2 years and then they don't get reprints again. But within that window, it is fair game. They will dump product, they'll not dump product. Speaking of a random distribution, and by the way, I might do Pokemon next after this because I am able to glean some fairly accurate financial statements just from what Nintendo discloses. But I'll save that for another day. So what's interesting here is it's really not about if Hasbro is going to reprint. It's the fact of how much, the timing, and things like that we'll get into. But they don't give a shit about the value of your cards. If they did, they wouldn't have reprinted 30th anniversary. And the fact that they reprinted 30th anniversary after they swore up and down till they were blue in the face that they weren't, and then in 2023, they removed the reprint policy from the website, they can't be trusted because there's no reason to trust them. They've never represented that they can be trusted. Well, I guess they did, saying they wouldn't reprint it. But then, look, things change, right? In a for-profit corporation, the only thing they care about is hitting the quarter and moving to the next one. So, last item here. Players drive the game. So Hasbro's listening to everything we say with my best interest in mind as a player. They don't care about you. And quite honestly, I'm not even sure they care about the LGSs at this point. Everybody involved in the economics of Magic the Gathering is a means to an end. And those means are to hit your quarterly numbers and get bonuses for the management team. It's that simple. It's clearly not to create shareholder value because Chris Cox has failed miserably at that. So has the rest of the team. So all of these misconceptions are quite simply wrong. Next slide. So I just finished putting these slides together and I've gotten back and forth on the order. So there's probably a couple more logical ways to put these in order, but just bear with me. You may have to go back and listen to this a couple more times. So financial planning analysis 101. And I'm going to make the case in here that they're using their FP&A and they're back solving for their numbers to build the number of sets and the reprints and the timing throughout the year, which is something I quite honestly, I've never heard anybody say. And I think once you listen to this, you're going to say, oh yeah, shit, it makes all the sense in the world. It's always been there. So on the left, this is from their Q3 press release, their supplemental disclosure. So here you have the 2025 Magic sets and the 2026 Magic sets. And what I want to really point into, and I have my little ghetto brackets here. Aether Drift is Q1, Tarkir Final Fantasy Q2, Edge and Spider-Man Q3. And in Q4, we only have our tiny little IP called Avatar, which there are a million SKUs. 2026, and we'll get to some conference call quotes from the management team where they've been pounding their chests that now all of a sudden they have 7 sets in 2026. They only had 6.5 sets in 2025. I'm not really sure how that comes. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess it's the 6 here, and then they had what? Innistrad Remastered, I guess, right at the end of the year. So you have Lorwyn and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Q1, Strixhaven and Marvel Q2. You have The Hobbit in Q3. So they're clearly planning for Marvel to push into here. I would imagine they're going to have the gift bundles delayed. Again, to push revenue into the quarter. It's not a printing issue. So just get that out of your head. Once you get through this, you're going to realize, holy shit, we've all been mistaken because we haven't really looked at the facts under the hood. And then in Q4, you have Fracture Reality and Star Trek. So I've presented the quarterly revenue 2 different ways. So the first graph here, this is your year over year, and I've color-coded everything so you can kind of see. So here is your Q3. So this is a quarter that just ended, $495 million revenue. This is only for Magic the Gathering, up from $296. Huge performance versus last year. And I probably should have put 2024 sets in here, but quite honestly, I don't really care that much. This is your Duskborn is in Q4. This is probably Bloomburrow, or maybe Duskborn was in September Foundations was November. Bloomberg was in July or June. Either way, one of the things you're going to see, and this is, I'll get into this more in the third iteration video, is that the total addressable market for the in-universes sets is capped. It is capped at the total number of people that are interested in Magic. There isn't a goddamn person in the world that's like, oh, Lorwyn, that's a cool IP. I hate Magic, but I'm going to go buy that fucking product. It doesn't exist. So when you look at the expanding mix of universes beyond, it's because the only way that these guys can expand the revenue base is to pull in people that aren't Magic players. So that's why we see such a big jump from last year to this year. Because look, you know, in their Q4 this year, Edge of Eternity was a great set. Spider-Man was a fucking disaster. Now, was it the second highest selling set of all time next to Final Fantasy? Of course it was. Not because it was a good set, because it was Spider-Man. So therein lies the power of the universes beyond IP. But as anything with these guys is they'll pick the big ones first, and then they will just totally shit the bed as we see in 2026. Now, they could make good sets, but making a good set is only going to get you to that cap of universes within. A shitty universes beyond set of a good IP is going to outsell the best universes within set of all time, any way you look at it, because all the Magic people are going to buy it, and you're going to have inherently people outside the world of Magic that buy it. So just get that through your head. That is the basis for why they're doing universes beyond and why Magic doesn't look like Magic anymore. Quite honestly, because this is more profitable. So moving on, here we have our Q2. You can see the increase here. I just kind of move the arrows here so you can see the numbers. If you want to pause it, zoom, whatever. Here's your Q1. So up pretty substantially. And then you have your Q4. So Q4 year over year was down pretty substantially from 2023 to 2024. Because remember, Foundations was kind of a train wreck because nobody trusted the fact that it was a 5-year rotation in play for 5 years. Nobody knew what was going on with the collector boxes and that stuff. So it was kind of a mess. And then, you know, you had Innistrad Remastered, which, you know, came out and there weren't even any spoilers other than Edgar Markov because there weren't any good cards in the set. So Q4 of 2024 was a disaster. Now, Q4 of 2025, this is the bogey. So they basically have to double revenue year over year. So it's a reach. Now, the revenue is able to be down from Q4 or from Q3, but it basically has to be even with Q2, which is Tarkir and Final Fantasy. So if you're starting with Avatar, you have a long, long road to hoe before you get to those numbers. And that's what we're gonna get into some of those numbers. Now, down here, this is sequentially. So you can see sequentially, and I use the same color coding. So Q4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can see in Q4 after Q3, the June quarter was Modern Horizons 3, I believe. That's why it was so strong. And then it kind of fell off a cliff again with your universes within set. Then Q3 was good. And then you had your Q1, then you had your Q2, your Q3. And Q1, Aether Drift did actually quite well up until pre-release, and then it kind of fell off a cliff. But there were also a lot of playbox reprints in Q1 that came. And then you get into Tarkir. So what's interesting is Tarkir kind of straddles Q1 and Q2. So even though the set came out in April, the transaction for the bulk of the sales to distributors happened in Q1. It would have happened well in advance of April 14th. So it would have been in March, potentially the end of February. So you're getting a lot of that Tarkir revenue here, whereas this is Tarkir, but it's primarily Edge of Eternities and Spider-Man. Or I should say Final Fantasy, and then your Q3 is Edge of Eternities and Spider-Man. And then, you know, this number here, this is a little scary because this is Avatar, which is it's a little weak. The price isn't good enough for them to sell product at MSRP, or I should say, a compelling sale where it's just going to disappear. They can sell it at MSRP on Amazon, which is still below market, but it's not going to be super compelling. It's probably going to be a little bit better than Spider-Man. So they have a Q4 problem. So moving to the next slide, because I'll be talking here for another hour if I don't get to it. So financial planning and analysis 101, part 2. Here's 101, here's part 2. So while most people believe Hasbro is a bunch of idiots whose decisions make no sense, and I've said this multiple times, this is simply not true. It's fantasy. Hasbro's set and reprint cycle is meticulously planned out based on quarterly estimates from Wall Street analysts. So they basically build out, this is what my revenue needs to be. Then they start saying, these are the sets that we have. These are the reprints that can come out. Then they start plugging, they put butts in seats, if you will. So they start putting sets in quarters and they're planning all this out. And then they start estimating the revenue. How much are we going to push out in secret layers? How much are we going to push through distribution? How much are we going to push direct to consumer? That's why you see so much push with Amazon over the years, because Amazon is a seller of last resort. You can't sell any more to distribution and through the LGS route, which quite honestly is a slog compared to just dumping shit on Amazon, which is, it's the fucking easy button. This is how they do things. And the reason why their decision to not reprint things don't make any sense, because we're all thinking about it the wrong way. And if we think about it this way, then all of a sudden it's like, holy shit, everything falls into place. So this became obvious, especially to me. And should be to everybody who listens to this when we're done. When Final Fantasy playboxes were delayed until November, and the prices were rapidly increasing, the common assumption was that there were delays in the printing process, resulting in no other option but to deliver the product in November. And I remember the Rudy video saying that, where the playbox is at, there must be issues, which quite honestly is a valid assumption. I was of the same mindset. But this was debunked 2 weeks ago, when just over a month, 4 or 5 weeks after the Spider-Man disastrous release, distribution all of a sudden started soliciting orders for Spider-Man playbox reprint. And I saw it on GTS. I called my rep. I said, "What the fuck's going on?" He's like, "I don't know. You tell me. You normally know first." I'm like, "Okay, fair point." I call my PhD rep and he's like, "Well, it's on the website, so it must be there." I'm like, "Okay, well, you're batting 1,000. Appreciate that." I called my Southern rep. He didn't know anything. But then a day later, it was on everybody's website. So the one product literally lowest on the demand list for everybody in the space is now getting reprinted. And the reason it's getting reprinted is not because there's all kinds of demand. It's because when these guys did their planning for 2025, they were planning on creating this perception of a shortage of playboxes, which they did, to distribution, and then hammering everybody with a reprint in Q4, by the way, as the prices were skyrocketing because it was Spider-Man and it was going to be a grand slam. And that's why we're seeing this. And then you start backing into, shit, you know what? I wonder if they planned Final Fantasy out because they needed the revenue in Q4. We go back here. We have this big jump. We have this big Q4. And right now we only have Avatar. How are we going to fill the gap? It sure as hell isn't going to be Avatar. You're not selling $412 million of Avatar, some shitty cartoon from 20 years ago. Yeah, you might sell 60 or 70. Well, I should say you might sell 150 million. But it's certainly not going to be 410. So Occam's razor. Quite simply, or quite frankly, the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. So Hasbro assumed Q3 was a lock, completely locked up with the tail end of Final Fantasy plus Spider-Man, which they had projected was going to be a grand slam. When Spider-Man tanked due to lack of serialized cards, and it being a small rejected set, Hasbro panicked. They absolutely panicked because Spider-Man was supposed to release the 26th of September. So they had tens of thousands of collector boxes and other products sold direct to consumer on Amazon at great prices. And all of a sudden they melted and they just went away in an instant because of cancellations, because the market lost faith because these dumb motherfuckers didn't put a serialized card in so they could reprint as much as they wanted to in Q3, in Q4, etc. So they pivoted and they pushed collector boxes from Amazon to distribution en masse because they needed to book revenue in the waning days of Q3. And as I mentioned before, if you sell on Amazon, until that product ships and the credit card is charged, it's not revenue. It is just sitting in somebody else's warehouse where you just have inventory there. The second they sell the distribution, that's revenue. That's a transfer of title on the assets. Now, is it better to sell on Amazon? Sure, you're getting a much better price than you are with distribution, but they didn't have a fucking choice. And they ended up beating earnings by approximately $3 million of net income. $3 million isn't a whole heck of a lot. I mean, if you think about it, they were selling collector boxes for $455, and their cost was probably $50, maybe $100. Call it 350. So you needed to sell 10,000. 10,000 boxes is basically what they made their quarter by. I mean, that's like a good couple days of dump. That's it. So, yeah, I mean, that's what we're talking about here. And they were doing the math the entire time. And that's why they panicked. So FP&A, part 3. In addition, Q3 brought massive reprints of Bloomburrow, Final Fantasy Commander displays because they were backfilling all this. They thought they were going to annihilate their Q3. And these are still sitting with all 5 of the primary distributors. In fact, I mentioned this in a couple of videos. I've had 3 reach out and say, hey, do you want any pallets of this product? We don't have enough space. We're getting more stuff in. We need space, which is its own problem. And then they dropped smaller reprints of Ixalan and Duskborn Commander displays as well. Now, those dried up. Those dried up pretty quickly. Like, there's a little bit of Ixalan with 2 of the smaller guys, but there's not much out there. And hopefully it's the final reprint, but everybody thought it was the final one the last time. So, as we're getting to the tail end of that, what went from a 2-year to a 3-year reprint cycle, nobody knows what the rules of engagement are, which, when people are uncertain, everybody assumes the rest. So that gets back to Wizards of the Coast. How the hell do we hit Q3? So this was the final part of 2025 and their annual earnings construction. So they wanted to ensure the Golden Goose lands in Q4. That is the Final Fantasy Play reprint, which was absolutely massive. This reprint is probably going to be every bit as much, I shouldn't say everybody's much revenue, but between Final Fantasy, this reprint, the Commander reprint, the holiday gift set, it's probably every bit as much revenue as what Avatar is going to end up being. And again, the reason why it took them 5 months to print was because they planned it that way. They needed the revenue in Q4, which we've just walked through and we've proven. And in the third episode, or the third video here, I'm going to get into how many boxes are going to each distributor. I'm going to keep it anonymous, obviously. We'll call it just distro 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we'll try to back solve into that. Now, it's not as easy because they disclose the magic number, but what they don't do is they don't disclose digital versus paper. Now, digital, I assume, is pretty stagnant at this point. It hasn't been the absolute profit machine that they thought it was going to be. Because at the end of the day, people do want actual cardboard that they can hold. Digital assets they're fucking shitty. I mean, look at NFTs. Everybody, their brother wanted them, and they just dropped them like a bad habit and said, "Well, what can I do with it?" So now they also plan on expanding direct-to-consumer sales for both Avatar, the only full set, and Final Fantasy Holiday. So they have been dumping these products on Amazon like a drunken sailor. Like, it is like their fucking life depends on it. Now, the other thing that I know they've done that most of you probably don't, they've expanded print runs of collector boxes and gift bundles to drive margins on products that are easier to sell through. So, for example, we go back to Tarkir. Call it on average, they were producing 40 collector boxes for every 100 play boxes. We'll just use simple math. Moving up to Avatar, where we're at now, there are approximately 50 collector boxes for every 100 play boxes. And that's just going through distribution. That doesn't mean that what they're holding back and they're selling to Amazon. And again, these are round numbers. These aren't exact numbers. Now we can assume that same ratio is what they're selling through on Amazon, but I would argue that they're selling far more collector boxes than they are play boxes. I just think it's more compelling. And I mean, quite honestly, outside of release, play boxes are kind of shitty. And until we see what happens with this 3-year rotation cycle, there's no basis in whether it's investable or not. Now we've seen some really, really great performance in Wilds of Eldraine, Lord of the Rings set from a collectability standpoint, but we are seeing all those reprinted again in Q1. So, you're getting to that 3-year time frame, but are they going to print it again in Q3 of next year? Because these motherfuckers are going to be desperate. The bar is so high in Q3 and Q4 in 2025, they are going to struggle with some of those garbage IPs or subpar IPs or small IPs or whatever adjective you want to call it to hit those numbers. So how else are they going to hit Q3? They're going to drop a Spider-Man play reprint, which is going to be in super high demand due to the perceived shortage of product through distribution at release. And this blew up magnificently in their faces. So I was so pissed off at my numbers that I got from distribution for Spider-Man because it was like 20% or 25% of what I got for Edge of Eternities. I'm like, what the fuck am I going to do with this? So they short shipped distribution. It created the perception that, hey, these boxes, they're short printed. It's worth a bunch. And then there was this rumor that they didn't have the licensing and they wouldn't be reprinted and this and that. I mean, it was the perfect storm of hype. Plus, I'm sure these guys wanted to sell as much of this shit on Amazon as they could. And then the whole thing just fucking fell apart. It was set up and choreographed so perfectly. And all these dumb motherfuckers had to do was put a serialized card. Just be a little bit less of a whore. And it would have been an absolute grand slam. Now, last 2 points. Push at least one $300+ secret lair every week for the quarter until people stop buying them and find a way to make them buy them again. I don't know why people keep buying these secret lairs. The skins are great, but there's only so many soul rings you have. I mean, I looked at Arcane Signet the other night. I was listing singles, and I mean, those cards are like 25 cents. Like every staple is worth jack shit. And they keep selling them, and they're able to upcharge them because you guys keep buying them. And they're not worth shit for resale. I mean, I don't know if you've ever tried to resell secret lairs outside of a few one-offs, but the singles don't move. The secret lairs don't move. I mean, it is so bloated, and there's just so much product in the market. There's no reprint equity left for half this shit. So, and then, you have Vivi that they reprint and then they ban it the second that they sell all the boxes to distro, and then they ban it. Like, they could have done that first, but that's not good business. It's scummy, but it's not good business. So, you don't care. And then you need to land the final reprint of your Commander displays of Lord of the Rings, Karlov Manor, Edge of Eternities, and Aether Drift in Q4. Edge and Aether Drift are coming the next couple weeks. Lord of the Rings and Karlov Manor are coming end of November, probably right after Thanksgiving. So, part 4. Renton, we have a problem. Renton's where Wizards of the Coast is. I figured, what the hell? It'd be a little humorous. So, their plan isn't going as planned on the demand side. The demand is falling off a cliff because the market is so saturated with product. People are starting to say, hey, if my product isn't going to hold value or, God forbid, go up like it was before, why would we buy this? And then they've effectively taken all of the investors out of the market. People don't really collect Magic anymore. Now, they did Final Fantasy. Nobody's collecting Spider-Man. Nobody's collecting Avatar. Maybe a handful of people. But they've executed the supply side of the plan with precision. Everything that they needed to do to get product in the hands to sell, they've done. The problem is they've just destroyed the value proposition of that product that they pushed to market. So Spider-Man tanked. Nobody wants it. Distribution's receiving minuscule orders for the reprint. And by minuscule orders, I mean from LGSs. Nobody wants it because nobody can sell it. I'll show a picture in a slide or two. Flipside selling the boxes for $135 in Hasbro or on Amazon. That's probably a $15 loss, all in with fees. They're just trying to dump it, and I'm sure it's not moving because nobody wants it. Loading the market with Final Fantasy play boxes is great. Unfortunately, they've overloaded the market, and there's more coming. These motherfuckers have more tractor trailer loads coming. You have Forge and Fire dumping boxes at $130 on their website. Wizards of the Coast themselves has been dumping the boxes on Amazon at $135. These cost at distribution, it's like $120 or $121. It's the goddamn Cynthia Williams playbook all over again. We've gone full circle. She's burned two companies to the ground. She went unemployed, and now I think, these guys are burning again. And I don't think it's her fault because, quite honestly, I don't think she's actually done anything. Like, you go into a company that's burning, and I don't even know how you get fired in a year. Like, it's scientifically impossible to do that, especially given DEI and in the state that they're located in. But not getting into politics, I digress. So the Commander displays, the reprints, they've been very well received through distribution, but now there's a problem with space. I've had 3 of 5 distributors. So there's 5 distributors that carry Magic. It's Alliance, Magazine Exchange, GTS, PhD, and Southern Hobby. Reach out to me with deals in the last 2 weeks because they don't have enough space. They're running out of warehouse space. And this is before Karlov hits, before Lord of the Rings hits, before Final Fantasy Holiday hits. Now that's going to be in and out of the warehouse. And the rest of the play and set boxes land in Q1. And then we have all the Pokemon shit that's going to land. And if they hit us with a massive reprint in Q1, there's going to be no room at the end, guys. Like, we are reaching supply chain gridlock at a very, very rapid pace. And Hasbro is going to be pushing a ton of product in Q1 again. So there's not going to be space in Q1 for the reprints of the magnitude that we saw in Q3 and Q4. And the ones that are scheduled to land in Q1, it's going to be a problem. And you don't have to trust me. Just look at the earnings call quotes. They focus on 3 things: set quantity, backlist stock, which is what they call reprints, and secret layers. And that's the only thing they talk about with Magic the Gathering in their earnings calls. So before we get there, Hasbro the Clown Show. So this was just today. So here we have, this is Magic the Gathering store. Magic Fraternity's collector boxes. They've been dumping these like crazy for the last couple of days at $321, which is their new MSRP. Remember, it used to be $299. They just raised their prices because that's the only way to make more money when you can't sell more units. So I don't know where these came from. They could have sold these for a while. Obviously, they're just now able to sell them because you would have started selling them in October, November to get booked in Q3. Not saying there's a reprint, but this was one of the sets that didn't have serialized cards in it. Again, that doesn't mean they can't reprint it. Just look at the 7 mysteriously missing Chocobos from Final Fantasy. And they just have to plan a little bit better. But you have Tarkir at 108. This reprinted distro was $100, 98, 96. Can't compete with that. Spider-Man, 138, but Flipside selling him at 135. Tarkir Dragonstorm, these were $140 a distro. They're selling them for $150. They're undercutting their own market, and they're removing any profitability from this product. And what that does is, if people can't move the reprint product, they're not going to buy the reprint product. So it's going to stack up a distribution. And as they continue to push reprints to distribution, they're going to say no more. We don't have the space. So they're making money now, but they're basically destroying the entire supply chain that's willing to accept reprints and push them through the system. Because if I can't flush what I have today, I can't do anything with what I have tomorrow because I have to move what's in front of me. That's just the way the world works. And that's where these guys fail because they either don't understand it or they don't want to understand it. Or quite honestly, they're like, yeah, fuck it. We'll figure that. We'll deal with that problem when we come to it. We got months before we get there. So Hasbro Inc. in the real world. So this is actually from their Q3, and this is the full slide. I cut pieces before. They have half one, half two, and they're basically saying, here are your numbers right here. Mr. Cox, next year we're going to have about the equivalent of 7 sets. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we're naturally going to have more content to sell, which is generally correlated with higher sales, because right here they're saying at the easiest level this year, we had call it 6.5 sets, because one of our sets was a little bit of crossover in terms of selling between Q4 of 2024 and Q1 of 2025. So that would be your Innistrad Remastered, which was a terrible set anyway. So they're saying we're going to add 1/2 quantity of revenue because of the timing of the sets that they pushed here. Great. So now we'll go to the next one. So we expect continued momentum fueled by upcoming Magic releases, including Avatar, Final Fantasy Holiday. By the way, this earnings call was October 22nd or 23rd, probably before some of the spoilers came out. But these are always really fascinating because the thing I like about their management team is they don't think about what they're saying. So a lot of times they're honest to a fault. And there's a quote where the CFO, they were talking about tariffs, and they're like, hey, the 60 million of tariffs that you guys paid in the second half, is it going to be less than that for next year? And she's like, yeah, it's going to be way less. But then she's like, well, it's probably going to be more because, it's going to be a full 365 days instead of like 200 days. And it's just like, I didn't even think before she answered the question. It's just like diarrhea of the mouth. But they're honest to a fault. So at least they're not bullshitting on the earnings calls. I mean, you can't. I mean, your stock's performing pretty poorly. So Last Airbender, Final Fantasy Holiday, and sustained momentum in Secret Lair and Backlist offerings. And then it's like, hey, Wizards is more than Magic. We also have this other shit that nobody cares about that they try to destroy. Anyway, I digress. So then we talk about collaboration with Magic and universes beyond, blah, blah, blah. And then I think there's upside in terms of the sets we can do in the future. And then I also think about it's all going to be buoyed by a very long and lucrative backlist as well, which we'll see playing out in 2024 and 2025. So they are looking at the reprint sets as their base. It's like, hey, this is if we do no sets, this is what we're going to reprint. This is what we're going to get to. So they talk about Universes Beyond. They talk about Secret Lairs, which are massive money makers because they're overcharged bags of shit that have no value after the fact, outside of, again, a handful. Now, there's obviously artificial demand for that because everybody and their brother is botting the shit out of them, and these guys are smiling all over the back. And then you have the backlist item. So the real world part 2. So for Wizards, we expect full year revenue growth between 36-38% and operating margin 44%. This improved guidance reflects the Magic over delivery in Q3 and sustained engagement and high demand through year-end releases. Magic revenue increased 55% to $459 million, driven by engagement in our Universes Beyond sets, our core IP Edge of Eternities, as well as continued momentum across Secret Lair and Backlist products. There you go. Secret Lair and Backlist products. Those are the two keys in addition to Universes Beyond. One of the best-selling Secret Lair products of all time was SpongeBob SquarePants. And if I can figure out how to get people jazzed up about SpongeBob, I can pretty much fucking do anything I want. Pretty sure we can do it to one of the biggest movies of all time, which I think they were talking about K-pop Demon Hunters, whatever. I didn't pull that context because, quite honestly, there's only so many words I can put on here. And here's another one. I mean, our backlist business, I think, is 70% ahead of where it was last year on a full year basis. So their reprint volume and what they're selling is 70% above what it was in 2024. That's actually good. I want to earmark that because that's a good one. Real world part 3. So here is the performance. And this is really, really interesting. So year over year, 8 full percentage points of volume and mix over last year. So this means more Secret Lairs, more Universes Beyond, and less in Universes sets because the margins are higher. And the reason you see that is you have minus 3.5% for royalties. So they talk about royalties in Q3 or Q2 and Q3 being through the roof because of Spider-Man and Final Fantasy. And then, you see operating expenses here. That's just That's the cost is the cost, right? Wages go up, inflation, cost of products, things like that. So that kind of is what it is. So, and then here's your walk from operating margin of last year to operating margin this year. These are always fun to do, and they were completely worthless because they don't mean shit. You can just, you kind of swag a lot of these, but whatever. So here, this was interesting, and this isn't necessarily related to Wizards, but it is. So this is the CFO, and this is the one who has a little bit of diarrhea in the mouth, but that's okay. It's these earnings calls are tough. I've done quite a few of them. Where we sit today without getting too much of 2026 guidance, unchanged priorities. We continue to first and foremost want to invest back into the business, invest in our growth drivers. So you continue to see us do that. Obviously, we have the dividend, and we're committed to the dividend. I have no fucking idea why she felt the need to say that, because the problem with Hasbro, they shouldn't pay a dividend. They should be paying their debt down and just make it a fucking annuity at this point. But they've proven they can't acquire anything outside of Wizards. Granted, buying Wizards offsets 100 bad acquisitions, which they've probably done. People in the stock because it yields 3.75%, plus or minus. When you start to become a dividend company, people start buying you for the dividend. Now, they don't really care about price appreciation, but they do care about the price going down. So they want your base to stay there, to stay at least consistent, or your stock price, their basis, whatever. The problem is these guys should probably cut their dividend at some point. But if they did that, the stock would absolutely plummet. So in the near term, it doesn't matter that much. But then the management team, the board gets pissed because they're paid in stock options, right? So all of a sudden their pay is gone. There's just literally no incentive whatsoever. And I've seen the telcos, Verizon and AT&T almost bankrupted themselves multiple times, like in the last 5 years. Because they don't want to cut the dividend. They just keep paying it, and the underlying business is kind of shitty. It's really CapEx intensive, and I haven't looked at them recently, but I have a feeling that AT&T is, it's kind of dying. But the same thing happened with Windstream Frontier. Like those two shitty companies, they just didn't want to cut the dividend. That's all they had to do. Just service the debt. You don't have to service the debt and pay the shareholders dividend. But these companies they're so fucking sensitive to cutting dividends when, quite honestly, it's probably in the best interest of the business. They do have a lot of debt. They could certainly service it, but it's probably more than they should have. So here we're talking about tariffs, and this is the one I was talking about. So tariff pressure in Q3 was roughly called $20 million-ish cost. Q4 it's a little bit more. So net impact is $60 million in 2025. So call it 20 in Q3, 40 in Q4, and then she's like, it'll be less overall for the year. The tariff cost itself will be bigger just because we have a full year. I don't know what the fuck that means. So it'll be less, but it'll be more. And then she's like, well, obviously there's 4 quarters in a year, and this year it didn't happen until Q3. That's anyway. So moving on to the moral of the story, because I think this is my last slide. Thank God, because I'm fucking tired. There are only so many ways to grow magic. And I tried to throw everything down here relatively quickly. I did all these slides tonight, even though I had a lot of the pictures set aside. Print and sell more units of each product. But the Cynthia Williams Amazon Print to Oblivion days nearly destroyed the company, and they tested the fence. Like, they know what the max is. And I actually meant to pull a graph out here of the annual growth of the TCG space. I know there's 1 or 2 publications that do it, but it's like at 1.5% to 2% a year. So, unless you're somehow pushing some sort of outsized IP, which Wizards of the Coast isn't, Pokemon is, you're not growing much bigger than that, which again, it creates a cap on the total number of people who just want to buy Magic the Gathering for Magic the Gathering, not Universes Beyond. So there's only so much product dilution to be had before everybody's had enough of the product, and it just sits on the shelves because nobody's buying direct, and distribution has no space or willingness to take more. Item to create more sets and add more SKUs to sets. They just said we're going to print 7 sets in 2026. We only had 6.5 this year. Holy crap, that's what they're doing. And then add more SKUs. I mean, holy shit, we got beginner boxes. We have beginner decks. Then we have Commander bundles, regular bundles, Jumpstart. Now, that's not new, but they're just adding more and more SKUs to this shit. And it's I saw a couple of videos of folks just carrying one of each SKU of Avatar. It was really, it's pretty intense. So now, what can they do next? They can raise prices. Holy shit, that's what they're doing. MSRP for your standard Tarkir as your Fraternity collector boxes was $300. The new Lorman MSRP in Q1 of 2026 is going to be $324. So it looks like they're raising everything somewhere around 8%. And they've actually raised prices in their consumer products division also, which is the toy business, which is it's a melting ice cube because it's like Blockbuster, right? There's only so much you can do until people don't want toys anymore. So you can print more of the product that people want. And we know that this is happening, in fact, because of the ratio of collector boxes and gift bundles that distribution is getting. Distribution for Avatar got almost double the number of gift bundles they got for Spider-Man. Now, that's because they printed more, but it could also potentially be, and I say potentially be, the fact that they ship more to distribution because Amazon for Spider-Man was a disaster. And the reason I say that is my initial minimum allocation from all my distributors for gift bundles was pretty small, and I ended up getting 3 times as many, which is a really, really healthy chunk. So item number 5, expand the rotation window from 2 years to 3 years to allow additional reprints. Now, when I talked about this last time, there were a couple of Timmys in the comment section that are like, well, Lord of the Rings isn't standard, so it doesn't count. It's like, shut the fuck up, dude. They're saying we're going to now keep the reprint open from 3 years to 2 years. The rest of the words don't matter. Like, nobody plays standard. It doesn't exist anymore. They've killed it. Now I'm sure they wish it would come back because now people need 4 of each card instead of 1. But looking at Lord of the Rings, and quite honestly, they made this announcement in May of 2023, which was like a month before Lord of the Rings came out. So they knew they were putting it out for Lord of the Rings because they knew with what they had to pay for the IP and how well it was going to sell, they wanted to keep it in print for 3 years. Like, it's the most obvious thing ever when you think about the fact pattern behind it. They just simply mass adding an extra year to be able to reprint with some bullshit play policy for standard, which, again, nobody plays anyway. But all the fucking Timmys in this space that are like, oh, you guys said it, it must be true. It's like believing everything the government says and believing they have your best interest in mind. Just keep thinking about that and live in your padded room and smile, and you'll be a happy person. So, item 6, expand distribution from traditional channels to direct to consumer. So this is really kind of a 2-pronged approach. So they've been trying to push the big box stores for Costco, Sam's, but for the most part, they failed. The product doesn't sell. What they bundle is kind of shitty. We've seen the Final Fantasy ones, the Duskmoon ones, the Bloomburrow ones, where it's a couple play packs and it's a random commander deck. Not great sell through, and quite honestly, I mean, Pokemon has had a lot of success with it, but they're really hit or miss depending on where it is in the supply demand cycle. The thing with Magic is that when it heats up and it becomes more popular, you're not talking the magnitude of increased demand that you have with Pokemon, where it's an absolute fucking mania. There's no such thing as a mania in Magic, just because it's not an IP. People know what Pokemon IP is. Magic doesn't have their own IP because they've thrown it out the window, 15 years ago. And then you have Amazon. Amazon, I think it's had some limited success. In concept, it's reasonable. The problem is these guys, they're not disciplined enough to do it the right way. And what I say the right way is you want to do everything you can to get that product for MSRP. And you want to keep it priced at MSRP in the market or a little bit above, which will allow you to sell more at MSRP if that's what you choose to do. And quite honestly, I mean, they should just have their own direct-to-consumer store like Pokemon does that's at MSRP. And quite honestly, they should cut the reprint window from 3 back to 2 years and just start building some confidence that these older sets are going to perform. And again, Lord of the Rings set, Wild's set, they've performed extremely well, but they are going to get hammered again in Q1. and maybe again after that. But Hasbro tends to undercut the price, or Amazon dump, which we like to call it, which shakes the confidence of the entire supply chain, and it crushes all justice. You guys saw the fucking prices for some of those products on Amazon. And nobody's making money except for Wizards at that price, because their cost basis on each one of those products is pennies, pennies on the dollar. So, and then you can expand the digital and the arena footprint. Now, the problem is this is stagnant. It could even be contracting. They don't disclose it, and if it was growing, they'd be pounding their chest and throwing these numbers out everywhere. Since they don't, I tend to think it's either stagnant or it's contracting a little bit. It's fast. It's really easy to play. I enjoy it in small doses. Now I don't have time to play it now, but ultimately people want to spend money on tangible cards, and that's why Magic the Gathering Online was really, really cool, because you could spend money on intangible stuff and turn it to tangible stuff, which you can't do in Arena. And it's like the whole NFT phase. All these guys think about, hey, the total addressable market is exponentially large, but at the end of the day, it all comes down to psychology and human nature. People are only going to spend so much money on shit and on junk. And I mean, look, there's a million cell phone apps that people pay money with microtransactions and stuff like that, but there's only so many people that are going to do it. It's like there's a million different gambling websites, and there's a fucking commercial on TV every 5 seconds. It's like the railroads in the 1800s. At some point, there's just not going to be enough money to go around, because it's not like everybody all of a sudden is gambling more, or somebody who hasn't gambled in the past is like, oh, what is this? Is this a sport? Maybe I will put the puck through the uprights and bet on this. Like it's limited. It's limited. So, we'll just keep that one for later. So in closing, let's go back to this guy right here. So hopefully this was persuasive enough. So most of you who can go through this with a little bit of an open mind and just a critical view can really start to turn this thing on its head and just look at Hasbro from the standpoint of, they are starting with, how many dollars do I have to make in my quarter? Then they're saying, well, how many dollars am I going to make from my different business lines? And then within those business lines of Magic the Gathering, how do I get to $400 million of revenue in Q4 of 2025? We have Avatar. We can build that. We have all these reprints. We can build that. We have Final Fantasy Play. That's an absolute fucking home run. That's going to take 40% of my revenue for the. It's not 40%. It's probably like 17.5%. And then we have all these secret layers. We're just going to keep pushing them and pushing them. And it's funny with secret layers, they went from unlimited print to demand to, we're only going to print 3,000 of them, and when they're gone, they're gone. And then all of a sudden it's print to demand again. And the customer population they're just so short-sighted. It's like, oh, well, I see Deadpool. I like it. It must be short printed. It's not short printed. There's a million of them out there. But it's just the world we live in. So anyway, guys, again, hopefully this was entertaining, educational. Feel free to comment. Like I said, it's going to take me a while to work on part 3. I'm trying to keep this as structured and as logical as possible. And there's just so many data points to pull in, and especially with limited time. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Join the Discord. I'd love to have conversations about this stuff. This is really fascinating. So instead of saying, oh yeah, why isn't there Final Fantasy on the shelf? You're really back solving and going to the source, and then you can start building out the supply chain from the way these guys plan out to the end user at the LG. So anyway, guys, have a great night. Appreciate you watching, and we'll talk soon.